Good evening and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. I'm your host, herbiologist, and joining me again is co-host Candace here from Capping with Candace. Candace, this week we have 3 Kentucky Derby preps and 3 Kentucky Oak preps. Let's start off with New York and the Gazelle Stakes.
Small field, but I think a talented field that we have here, led by Kano Commando, who's kind of owned New York to this point. But she'll get a little bit more of a formidable group this time around, I think, with Jacaranda, with Noble and Beauty, who won a local stakes, and with Wonder Gal, who's kind of been on the comeback here, along with a few others that maybe kind of fill the spots a little bit, I would say. Starting off with Condo Commando, I think that, while her wins have been visually impressive, the last 2 she's had, I don't really think that she's beaten all that much, and so she's one who I'm taking a stand against, not only in this race, but I just don't even really like her much as an Oaks contender. There's other horses who I prefer. Again, I just don't think she's really been tested to this point. Her last race at Aqueduct, she won easily over Paula Silver Lining, but Paula Silver Lining really doesn't want that distance at all, so for her to even be within 4 3/4, I think maybe exposes Condo Commando a little bit in this sort of a spot, stretching out now to the 9 furlongs. I'm really intrigued by Wonder Gal coming back here. She is a horse who I thought, as a 2-year-old, really ran a few nice races, particularly in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, where she finished 3rd there behind Take Charge Brandy and Top Decile, despite having, a 4-wide run there. And I thought that she really put in a nice sustained run and was closing well in that spot. She's tough to take off of such a long layoff, however, but I am interested in seeing, what she can show us, because she has been a talented type, and I really want to see, if she's kind of held that form into her 3-year-old campaign, but I can't take her just because she's coming off the layoff. I'm going to go with Jacaranda here. She's a half to Constitution, definitely has class in the family. She finished 11th, beaten 38 lengths in Devonadale. That race was crazy. The track was so tiring. She had an awful start. She pretty much chased wide all the way around the track. That's going to do it for any horse. The 38 lengths doesn't even matter because she obviously was eased at that point. I am just going to toss that run. I know she's better than that. She's shown us that she's better than that. If you're looking at form, she also raced against Paula Silverlining back in November and beat her pretty well too. So I think that class-wise, she stacks up well here with Condo Commando. And I see those two kind of being the 2 speeds in the race and duking it out front. So I'm going to take Jacaranda on top. I think with that poor finish last time out, you're going to get a better price on her than is typical of a Pletcher horse shipping up to New York for a graded stakes race. But we'll take it, and she's the one I'm going to go with.
Yeah, I agree. Condo Commando is an example of a horse that, has been the benefit of either biased tracks, weak races, sloppy surfaces. They threw into a maiden claiming 75K and got away with it. I mean, this is a horse with 4 lifetime wins that I don't like any of them. And I think she is going to finally get tested on the front end today. I think she's actually going to face legitimate, well, maybe not grade 1 horses, but some solid grade 2 stock. Wonder Gal comes off the layoff. One of the things about Wonder Gal is she was entered in a 6 furlong race a couple of weeks ago, and that Friday card got scratched out, so now she has to come in without a prep. She has been working for quite a while. She's going to, I think, she won her maiden off the bench, so I think she's capable. But again, I'm going with the same horse as you here. I've been high on Jacaranda all along. This horse was trained by Michael Houchon, who has had some health problems, and so it's kind of Pletcher in name only. I think the horse was pretty much ready to run, and it ran against the bias and into some soft fractions off the bench. I think they totally eased it up. It's 2 for 2 in New York, and I think she's going to be tough in this spot. One horse that I've never liked all along, but just for some reason kept on watching the replays enough, and Puka may get a nice setup here, especially if Jacaranda and Condo Commando get into a little bit of a duel. 9 furlongs and back on the only track that she did get her win. Puka could be kind of lost a little bit in the board, and she's one I'll use in backups and doubles, and just because I think the price will be right, and there may be a small chance of a speed duel.
I think so, and I think one I also want to comment on as maybe being one on the flip side who doesn't offer value like Puka might. I think Noble and Beauty is a horse who's going to take some money in here. I wouldn't be surprised if she went down, maybe second favorite or third favorite behind Condo Commando, but just based off her record, lightly raced, won 2 of her 3 starts. Her only loss was to, a nose defeat to Paula Silver Lining. A few things I don't like about her. For one, if you just use Paula Silver Lining as straight form, she's running against several of these. She looks to be a little bit behind the 8 ball for the likes of Condo Commando and Jack Randa. I also think that it was a little weird that they ended up running her in the sprint stakes. She was nominated to the local prep before this, which Condo Commando won. And there were some weird things that happened. She was on my fantasy team, and I noticed she missed a few works. I think maybe the weather had something to do with that. And then instead came in this spot and won a sprint. I am skeptical of her over this distance, and I think she's caught soft fractions a few times, which she won't this time around. So, while UC Puka is one who maybe could provide value and get the right setup, I look at Noble and Beauty as one I want to avoid, who might take a little bit of money here.
And we're both anti-Condo Commando, so we'll
Yes.
see how we're matched up in that race. The Wood Memorial, it's a grade 1 in name. I'm not so sure the horses that entered here are grade 1 material, but at least from a handicapping standpoint, I think nobody will be under even money, which is at least one positive thing. We've had quite a few of those lately winning.
That's true. I mean, I think if anything, it's a competitive race. We have El Kaibir returning. He's kind of been the stalwart up in New York, and his second place finisher in the Gotham, Tiz Shady, also returns in this spot. And then we have a couple kind of invaders from Florida between Frosted, who was 4th in the Fountain of Youth, and then Daredevil, who was one of the top juveniles, came back and finished 2nd in the Swale, shows up in this spot as well. For me, it's hard for me to find anything against El Kaibir. I'm going to go with him here. I know people are skeptical of him at 10 furlongs, and you could probably put me in that group, but this is 9. I think 9 is still within his range. He really just has owned New York. His only loss up there was whenever he dueled all the way around the track, which is a valid excuse for me. So I'm going to go with him here. There's really no value in that. It's probably not a betting race if you just want to bet the race alone. It's a race that I think if I was playing, my multiple race wagers, I would just, single El Kaibir and move on. I think he is better than these. Frosted is a little bit intriguing. I think he has solid form down in Florida, and I'm mostly glad he's running here because I think it'll give us a sense of the Florida crew versus the Wood Memorial crew. We haven't had this year nearly as much crossover between kind of our geographical regions as far as the Kentucky Derby goes. So I think Frost is going to give us a good idea of how the Florida horses stack up against the New York horses. If he comes in here and just destroys them, well, then maybe the New York farm isn't so strong. So I don't like him to win in this spot, but I'm definitely going to be paying attention to him just as kind of a guide on form between the two regions. I think the horse I'm against the most is Daredevil. He caught so many sloppy tracks last year, loved every single one of them. In the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, where I know there was a hot pace, there were horses who stayed on, most notably Upstart, and he was not one of them, just completely quit in there, and then came back in the Swale, a race that he probably should have won, but didn't, and, I'm just one that I'm really skeptical of him running over a dry surface. Now there is rain in the forecast. Should it rain on the day, that's a totally different story, and it's probably the race, all his. If it rains, if he catches a sloppy track again, and you know what, if he catches a sloppy track again, he's probably the luckiest horse of all time that I've ever seen. So, possible, but hopefully, I'm hoping we get a dry surface in this kind of a spot. So yeah, I'm going to go with El Kaibir on top. Tiz Shady is intriguing to me. I tipped him last time out. The only problem is you're not going to get the price you got last time out, but he is interesting in that I think, he is a horse that is so lightly raced. He really is rapidly improving, and he wants this distance. Any stretch out in distance is a good one for him, so I would use Tiz Shady under El Kaibir. Again, this is all assuming that it's not a sloppy surface, so.
Yeah, you do have to keep in mind, I agree, Daredevil got his 2 wins in the slop. He did get them in New York. He did have the 1 prep. If it is a sloppy surface, I really truly believe Daredevil is one of the best mudders I've seen in the last few years, so I would select him. I'm going to go with Frosted on the strength of a couple of things. Not only do I not want to see the Florida form, I want to see all these horses start running when they get off that Florida surface. And this weekend, we're going to see 6 or 7 horses, and I think a few of them are going to jump up big time. But Frosted also gets Joel Rosario. I've been questionable of his rider the last few races. Not to say that it would have made a difference. I just think a better rider long term is going to help. I like to work out 2 workouts back. They purposely ran him behind a horse and galloped him out 7 furlongs. And then the biggest unknown factor of all is the throat surgery. And if any horse ever looked like a 5-length winner at the top of the stretch in the Fountain of Youth, it was Frosted. I just can't believe that every single article that was written about this horse from November until January said that this was one of the best bred horses in the crop. He runs 4th in the Fountain of Youth, and every handicapper in America says he's a 6-furlong horse. I'm just not buying it. The last horse that had surgery like this was Unbridled, and he ended up winning the Derby. He could have swallowed his tongue. He could have had the throat problems. He could have bled. I just think there's 8 or 9 things that could have happened in that race. I think he takes a significant class drop as well, because I think Upstart would have clocked these horses. And just think the Florida form is better. So I'm going with Frosted, Daredevil if it's sloppy, and El Kabir. I mean, the problem with El Kabir, he went wire to wire, and then he dueled, and then he came from behind. I have no idea how he's going to run, and I'm not even sure what the fractions are going to be, because it doesn't really look like a lot of pace here. I'm assuming Daredevil goes to the lead, but I really don't know.
I think he goes to the lead, and I think Al Khaibir definitely comes from off the pace. They seem like they're committed to that now, and maybe an effort to get him going over as far distances as possible. I think they know, as well as the rest of us, that 10 furlongs probably is a little bit of a stretch for him. But yeah, you think that you wouldn't want him to be nearly as far back as he was last time. And to be honest, I was surprised he was as far back as he was last time. It worked out there, but same strategy might not work here.
Let's go now to Keeneland. The Bluegrass this year has been moved up a week, and the Ashland is the Oaks Prep. And again, I think the Oaks Preps are the races that are going to offer the wagering value this week.
I think so, particularly in this race, because I am very much against the favorite in this spot, who on the morning line is Peace and War. We haven't seen her in about 6 months now. She's only run 1 time in America and got the setup of all setups, maybe of any horse of the entire year. Just cut the sloppy track, which is what she's absolutely bred for, and then got blazing fractions out front that she closed into. She is not going to get that here. There really isn't that much speed at all. And, you know, while her form overseas going into that race was okay, it wasn't anything great, and she was nowhere near the best juvenile fillies overseas. So I question her form. I certainly question whether or not she was the best horse in that race. And I'm taking a huge stand against. I don't want anything to do with her, not even just on top. I don't want her at all anywhere in my wagers. I'm going with Lovely Maria on top here. She's a horse who can run forwardly in a race that I think is devoid of a lot of speed here. Has very nice form coming into this race. 1-2 back over Shook Up, who I think has since flattered her form a little bit with running second time at Chatterbox last weekend. And then she herself finished second time at Chatterbox in the Rachel Alexandra. I think this race sets up perfectly for her, and she's a horse who, she hasn't been improving, but she really has had steady form coming into this race. And in a field that several of these horses I think were good at one time and have kind of really fallen off of form. She's the one who I would really like to take in the spot. So I'm going to go with Lovely Maria on top.
Yeah, again, we don't discuss these before we record them, and I'm anti-peace and war, but I've been saying that for about 6 months now. I mean, just from a wagering standpoint, you have to take stands if you're going to really be a weekend player. And horses that are shipping over from Europe, that go through quarantine, that haven't raced in 6 months, and that are under 4-1 odds, that's just not a good wager. Then you add in the fact that she got a total pace meltdown last fall, and she caught a sloppy track. Several horses made early moves and middle moves, and she was just the last horse who made a move, and she won. And not to say that she doesn't have some good breeding, and it sounds like they're going to have a campaign here, maybe run her in the Alabama and races like that. So I'm excited to have her over here, and I think she's well trained. I still think European trainers train them long, and they gallop them, and they race them up and down hills. So I just think that this race, though, demands to be a little bit more quick of foot, a little bit more speed. She's going to face some, I'm not saying that this is grade one quality horses. So I just think she's a bet against for a lot of reasons. And a couple of horses that had sneaky trips that people may not have caught the last race. A horse that I didn't like the last time, but I thought the more I watched it, I was impressed with Angela Renee's last race. There was a couple of points in that race where she kind of got checked, and then she ran wide, and then everybody was kind of watching I'm a Chatterbox, but there was about a 5 or 6 second stretch there kind of going into the turn and maybe up until mid-stretch where Angela Renee was actually moving pretty good, and then the jockey totally stood up on her. So I kind of see her looking a little better than that dirtied up past performance line. And really, if you think about it, I'm a Chatterbox is still one of the top horses in this class. So it's a nice race. I think Silver Pockets Full is better than that last race, but my top choice here is one of those Gulfstream horses moving up. I'm going with Last of the Mohicans. I was impressed 3 back with her race, and then the last race was just, anytime you get a 13-horse field, you're going to have problems. Even if it doesn't even look like a horse has problems, just having that many horses running in that many different spots, you don't get clear trips unless you're on or near the pace. So I think this horse has had a long string of workouts. I like the trainer. They seem to do well in Kentucky. Normally it's at Turfway Park in Churchill, but we'll see what he can do at Keeneland here. And I think the price will be 6 or 7 to 1. And I think Last of the Mohicans is kind of a dirtied up trip that last race.
I agree. When I looked at this race initially, I quickly took it down to 2 horses, Lovely Maria, Last of the Mohicans. A lot of what I said for Lovely Maria applies to her too. She does have the ability to go close. She breaks from the rail here in this spot. And again, I think you're going to want a horse who's closer to the pace here. There isn't a whole lot of speed. So I would be against Peace and More for that reason, and on one of the horses who you see maybe running up a little closer to the pace. One I was intrigued by, though, here is on the morning line, West Coast Belle is 4 to 1. Has completely fallen off form as of late. Do you think she really takes that much money?
I saw that morning line and I kind of giggled. And, she took money for 2 straight races, but, I'm willing, me and you a lot of times will make, we can look at races and find something, but I honestly couldn't find anything those last 2 races. No. Yet she did work out, and her best form was last fall at Churchill. I have a feeling she'll be like 6 to 1, but sometimes those morning line guys know more than you think. So, yeah. I think some people may just bet her. You just don't know a horse like that. But, I can't take her because I can't find an excuse. But on the other hand, I'm kind of rooting for her because I did like her a lot last fall.
I'm the same. I really want her to do well. I loved her last fall with some of her races at Churchill, too. So if she got into the Oaks, obviously that's where the race is. But she's just totally fallen off form. I don't know what. I don't know if she's had some sort of an issue. I don't know if that big win in the Goldenrod took something out of her. But I agree. I couldn't have her just because I can't find any sort of excuse. Maybe you could say some for that race for her first run of the year at Fairgrounds when she kind of had a little bit of trouble at the start. But she finished 8 lengths back. I can't make that much of an excuse even if you have a poor start. So yeah, she's a tough one in here, but there's a few like her. Even like you mentioned, Angela Renee ran good last time, but she's a hard one for me too because she's so inconsistent. One week she runs huge, the next week she falls on her face. It's just I don't know what to do. I can't pick a horse like that to win. I just don't even know what to do with a horse like that. You just go. I think that's the type of horse that at a low price you just risk them and hope it's not one of the days where they run their big race, I guess.
Yeah, West Coast Belle, like I said, I'm kind of rooting for her, but I can't put her on my tickets even. Angela Renee I'll use just because I didn't spot that she made about a good 20-second run, and that, and maybe, she just didn't like the fairground. She gets Keeneland. She's ran some big races, and, I'll always go, so I think you can make a little bit more excuse for Angela Renee, not that, I just think this race is kind of ripe for a little bit of a price, and that's why I'm going with Last of the Mohicans, but I could easily see Lovely Belle at 5 to 1. Silver Pockets Full at 9 to 1 is going to be on all my tickets and exactas and trifectas. So I think this has a chance at a nice 3 to 7 to 1, and I'm throwing out Peace and War. Now the Bluegrass we'll get back to kind of a really heavy favorite in this race. And I guess how do you see the race, and I guess where are you going with your selection?
For me, it's pretty clear. I think Carpe Diem wins this race, and it's not for lack of trying to find somebody to beat him. I don't love Carpe Diem, and he's not a horse that I'm really excited for the Derby or anything. I just had a really tough time making a case for anyone else. So maybe what I'll do is I'll say I'll key Carpe Diem on top and instead give who I think will finish second. Maybe that's a little bit more variety, but I like Carpe Diem to win. To finish second, I like Classy Class. We've seen him a couple times now running close. He finished fourth in the Remsen last November. A lot of those horses that come up well, including Frosted. Keen Ice, his comeback this year was third in the Withers. That was whenever he, was dueling around the track with Carpe Diem then in the Gotham. And, he's a horse who I just think he's shown us consistent form up in New York, running with the likes of El Kabir, Far From Over. This is another horse who I think will, give us some line on how that New York form is compared to other places. And, he's one who I can make some excuses for. In the Withers, he had a little bit of trip troubles in there. And then in the Gotham was the obvious, dueling around the track the whole way around. So, there's definitely excuses to be made. I think he's caught some pace, some race shapes that weren't necessarily conducive to his running style. And he was closing late last time out despite having missed that break. So, a lot to like about Classy Class, and I think he will offer a little bit of value if you plan to play this race. Again, I would just key Carpe Diem to win, and he's the one I'd look for to finish second.
Yes, I think the theme this year is, whenever I think the favorites are going to win, I'm just going to take them, and whenever I think they're vulnerable, I'll pick a different horse. And so that's why I'm not taking Piece of War, because I legitimately think she's vulnerable. But in this case, I have to pick Carpe Diem. And again, it's one of those few things where I think he's the fastest horse. I think he can get the distance. I think he's got the best breeding. I think he's got the best prep. I don't think the lemon's been squeezed dry, and he's got it, I still go back to his Bluegrass race last year and won by 6 over the surface. So as a win ticket, that, or the win selection, that's who I'm picking is Carpe Diem. I do want to talk a little bit about the Tampa Bay Derby, because Ocean Knight ran horrible, and a horse that you were pretty high on going into that race, who does come back in this race, is Danzig Moon. Can you make any excuses for him, and what was the deal with a couple of no-shows in that race?
There's nothing I can say. I've watched that replay a few times, and he was just never going to win the race, and he was never going to be close to Carpe Diem in this race. You'd certainly hope he would close that gap. He was 12 lengths back in that race and looked exhausted, which, again, was just weird because he's been training, reportedly so well going into that race. I think if he, springs here, maybe it was just that he didn't take to Tampa. We know that surface is one that, some horses like it and some horses really don't. So, perhaps we'll see him kind of come to life a little bit here away from a track if he did struggle there. He has ran at Keeneland before, so, maybe that potential that he's coming back to a track over which, he ran okay. It was in his debut win, and he didn't win it, but he didn't necessarily run a bad race in behind some soft fractions. Comes in here with a bullet workout. I can't use him, but I'm certainly intrigued. As somebody who has a future wager on him, I'd love for him to do well and get in the race. But I can't use him in this spot to win or even really to finish second. Third place, I think, is well within his range, though. So if you're playing a trifecta, I would put him on the bottom.
Well, what's interesting is a second place horse is going to get 40 points and make the Derby, and you can make the case for 4 horses: Danzig Moon, Classy Class, who's already got a few points anyways, and then you've got Danzig Moon, and then the horse that I had high hopes for him, didn't run a bit the last race, but I think he's another horse we're going to see getting off that Gulfstream surface. I just think there was way too many good workouts for Gorgeous Bird to be that bad. So again, I mean, he can make up 5-6 links out of that race, but he's still facing a monster in Carpe Diem. But I mean, if Gorgeous Bird, I think he's capable of running second. I have no clue. I mean, Fermento, any one of those 4 could run second to me.
Yeah, and I think this is another race where similarly to the Ashland, I look at a horse and I'm like, is this horse really going to take this much money? Is Ocho 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 really going to be 6-1?
Yeah, we didn't talk about him, but, up until that Santa Anita Derby, I was actually he had about 3 or 4 workouts in a row that were videotaped and put on either TVG or HRTV. And there was one workout that I had as an exceptional workout. So I think he's going to be the speed of the speed and be sent here. And he's a gritty little horse. Now, he's still small, and I've always been questionable about him getting the distance anyways. But this is clearly, I mean, they're going for the Derby. They've got Derby fever. They want second or third. He's already got 10 points. Third place would give him 30, and he's in. Second place would easily get him in. So can Ocho just run on the inside and run all the way around and run second or third or win? And yeah, I mean, I really don't know what to do, but I just know that that last race has no bearing on. I mean, he may not be a grade 1 winner, but he's better than that last race.
Yeah, I mean, he's another one, like, I don't necessarily think he has much of a chance to beat Carpe Diem, but he does have speed, and I agree that that last race was not indicative of how good he is. He was coming off of quite a long layoff there, blew the start, was in a position that he's not used to being in, was just pulling all over the place. I mean, the way he acted during the race made me think, he's a fresh horse, and he hasn't ran in a little while, and he's still maybe he's young and a little bit immature, but he's better. He has more talent than he showed in that race, and I would expect him to show it here, but he is a horse who I think just might not be good enough. He could run his race and just not be good enough to win or finish second.
All right, well, we're both going with Carpe Diem in that race. Now we go out west, Santa Anita Oaks, get a good rematch, and then a horse that you had the last time, Stellar Wind, also steps into this race, and overall, again, the Oaks preps are actually bettable.
I think so. I mean, I'm really liking these Oaks preps, and the fact that there are some favorites that you can play against, or horses who we think will be favored. I wouldn't be surprised if Stellar Wind ends up going out favored off of that big win last time out, and because she's Curlin and people seem to bet these Curlins, especially as the distances sort of stretch out. I like her in this spot. I think, visually I was impressed with her, and I picked her and I was shocked a little bit. Like, it was more of a little bit of a stab in the dark with her last time because the breeding was there, but you just don't really know what to expect from a Virginia bred being shipped with Laurel form. But she ended up running a very, very nice race there. And I was, impressed because she beat Light the City, who is a horse who I've liked for quite some time, and I think is a really good marker in these types of races because she runs her race every single time, and these are distances that we know she stays fine over, being street sense out of an AP Indy mare. Maybe one I'm a little surprised by in the spot is Curlin's Fox. They've intended, I think, to run her in that last prep over dirt. Then they pulled her out of the race, put her in a turf race. She finished second. Now they're trying her back on the dirt. I'm a little worried about her ability to handle the surface, given that it seems like there really is no plan there. And I just never like to see when you don't think there's a plan, especially when you're leading to a race like the Derby or the Oaks, where there are, scheduled preps. It seems so easy. You almost have a plan built in for you. So I don't like when you see these horses all over the place, scratching, running in other races, coming back, surface changes, all this in this type of a scenario. So I'm very much against Curlin's Fox. Ultimately, I'm going with Luminance here. She's only ran twice. She won both of her starts. Last time was an allowance win over Wild at Heart. She's just the type of horse that I think really profiles well for this race. Lightly raced, improving type. That's, with that pedigree tail to cat over an unbridled sung mare, you think, this distance would not be an issue for her. Baffert is rolling right now at Santa Anita. Bullet workout coming into this race. You're not going to get a ton of, big price on her by any means, but I think she really is the type of horse who you look for in the spot and look for. So if she makes it into the Oaks, these lightly raced types can really make a big improvement in one race.
Yeah, I narrowed it down to the two horses that actually come out of the allowance race. I thought the Grade 1 Lost Virginess was Grade 1 in name only. So even though visually Stellar Wind will look impressive and she's got the pedigree, and I think she's going to run a good race, I'm just not so sure that she's a Grade 1 horse and these other ones are not. Out of those two, Luminance and Wild at Heart, I'm going Wild at Heart. I thought she only lost by 2 inches the last time. I think the tote board is clearly going to get tilted towards Luminance. And the judge, Dick Mandela, doesn't mess around. He worked it out, 111 last week. I mean, I think it's going to be a dogfight again. I think it's those two. And last time Luminance won by 1 or 2 inches. And so I'm just going to go with Wild at Heart. just because I thought that she moved just a second too soon the last time. And I just love the way Mandela can get a horse ready when he points for a race. And I think this horse is coming to this race just like Beholder did a couple years ago. And I think she's going to be a factor in the Kentucky Oaks. He's one of the few trainers that I truly think can get a horse ready for a big race. But Luminance is going to be right there. And I think it'll be a head difference either way.
I'd agree. I like the form of that race. I think both of them will run well coming out of it. And agree with what you said about Stellar Wind. I expect her to run a nice race as well. A few others who I couldn't really take, but I think those are kind of your three to have and move forward with.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Light the City is kind of the judge, because if two or three of these horses clearly beat her, then I think we've got some good horses. Now, if she kind of splits a few of them, then I'll be like, oh, maybe we've just got kind of a bunch of mediocre horses. Because even though I love the pedigree on Light the City, and I think she's ran all of her races, I don't see a lot of improvement left in her. I just see her as she does what she does. She's a 90 speed figure, and if you run faster than the 90, you'll beat her, and if you run slower than the 90, she'll beat you.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I see her. Like, there's a lot to like about her. I'm a fan of hers, and I do love her pedigree. But I agree. Like, we've seen her so many times now. I'm not sure. I just think she's a little more exposed, whereas a horse like Luminance is a little bit more of a progressive type and has that room to improve moving forward.
Santa Anita Derby, we get a 6-horse field. Three of the horses come out of the San Felipe, and then we add a couple of new horses. And this is it's a deep field again, but it's always hard to tell with rematches, because are you just rematching? It's like when the Vikings play the Lions. Are you just rematching two mediocre teams, or what do we got here?
What? That didn't just happen. Oh my gosh. Okay, recompose myself. Hide the anger. This race is really intriguing to me because when One Lucky Dane ended up opting to run here instead of the Bluegrass, my initial thought was, okay, we're going to finally see Dortmund go back to his old style and right off the pace because One Lucky Dane has some natural early speed. And then Dortmund drew the rail, and I thought, well, maybe this isn't going to happen. So now I'm a little bit concerned because I'm taking Dortmund in the spot. Huge fan of the horse. Just think on class alone, he's better than these. My concern for him, though, is that he now has speed directly to his outside in One Lucky Dane. Bolo, we still don't know. By some miracle, he rated last time, but that's the only time I've ever seen him rate in a race or work or anything his entire life. Love the horse to death, but now if Dortmund ends up on the inside of one or two other speeds, I think we're going to really, get a test for him in that we're going to see, if he has that other dimension that perhaps we haven't had to see him work for at this point. And then things could get interesting too, because he's a big dude. He kind of goes wide around the turns. I don't know if we're gonna get some kind of, issues if he's floating other horses wide off the turns. Just a lot of chaos could happen. I'm picking him. Love the horse. Think he's the class of the field, but I'm a little more wary now than I was with him being on the rail, and especially even more so with potential early speeds directly to his outside.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that make this race a little bit more interesting than the San Felipe. I'm picking Dortmund too. I kind of made a pact with myself after his debut race that I was very impressed, and I've picked him 5 straight times, and so my win percentage with him is high. You just can't make any money betting him. But I do think, now here's an example. Like Carpe Diem, I don't think can lose. But Dortmund possibly could lose. Now, that doesn't make it very much more likely. I just think of the two, I really don't think Carpe Diem could lose. But that doesn't mean I don't think Dortmund's not a better horse. It's kind of one of those bizarre scenarios. Bad Reed Sanchez, Doug O'Neill has this thing with running horses in long races off layoffs. I looked at his workout pattern, like, this horse, even though he's not running until April 4th, like American Pharoah didn't start working out until mid-February. Bad Reed Sanchez was working out on December 22nd. Then he worked out on December 29th. He had 2 workouts in January. He had a 7 furlong workout in 128, a 7 furlong in 130. So I've got him and One Lucky Dane kind of going at speeds, and then, like you say, Dortmund sitting third at the rail. But I think, last time Dortmund just outclassed him. I think this time, I mean, you kind of learn a little bit more. Not that he ran perfectly from third in the Los Al Futurity, so that doesn't bother me either. But what do you think? Like, what's up with this Bad Reed Sanchez? Like, it's just unusual. You see a horse work out for 4 straight months, and then they point him long. It seems like to me, fresh. It's a good idea because he's going to be fresh, and he'll probably go to the lead.
That's true. It is unusual. I agree that it's something we're not used to seeing a lot, especially at this level of race. My worry, though, is that I don't think he's fast enough to clear this field. And that's ultimately my concern with Dortmund. I mean, One Lucky Day has speed, Bolo can go forward. I think the only horses in this race who have the speed to clear the field are Dortmund and Bolo. I don't think Bad Reed Sanchez, as much as he wants the lead, is necessarily fast enough to go get it on his own if one of those other horses wants the lead as well.
So yeah, I do want to mention I'm pretty anti One Lucky Dane, which I hate to say because I actually I had him on my trip notes. I had him as my horse to watch. I had him as my sleeper pick all winter long. They uncovered him 2 weeks ago. Now we got a little. I mean, problem was is that track was so front running biased. There was 5 wire-to-wire winners that day, and it dressed him up. But just imagine if One Lucky Dane had went to the wood, how really this Derby would shape up. You'd have another horse who could potentially be going in off a couple of big wins. Boy, I'll bet you Baffert would have wished that he would have maybe reconsidered that.
I just don't like that he's in the spot. I mean, I'm with you. I wrote a big thing with a bunch of pictures of his Breeders' Cup Juvenile run and how he had all these trip troubles and how much I was excited to see him this year. And obviously he had some sort of a setback that kept him off the trail for a while. But the second he won the race at Santa Anita, I thought, cool, Illinois Derby, Preakness, perfect timing. Those will be fields he can beat well coming again off this long layoff. And here he is. And I just really hope it doesn't end up being too much too soon because I think he's a very, very talented horse. But this is deep waters right away, second off the layoff.
Yeah, so I'm still very intrigued by Bolo. I do think if I had to pick another horse that can win this, it would be Bolo. Just because the last time he came off the 2 month layoff and he had a new rider, and now goes back to Mike Smith, which it's a small, but it's a subtle thing that could make up a half a length difference. The thing is, I like Prospect Park. I just not sure this is his race to win. I kind of like him more as the Derby horse. So it's an intriguing race. I think Dortmund's going to come off the pace, and I think One Lucky Dane is going to be on the lead, and I'm going with Dortmund.
Yeah, Dortmund is the horse I like to win this race. I agree. Prospect Park is one who I just wanted to get some points because I've said to you many times, but I've committed that so long as he, reports on him are fine, that in the Derby, if it rains, Prospect Park is my boy. So I want him in that race, especially in case of a sloppy track. I think he's a horse who would move up a ton and provide a lot of value in the Derby should that he get those conditions because he hasn't run over a sloppy track, but he's bred to run over it all day. I guess I'll mention him because we mentioned everybody else, but Cross the Line comes in here from Golden Gate, switching to dirt from the synthetic. I don't think dirt will be an issue. I don't know if he's fast enough, but he looks like there's potential for him to get some sort of a setup in the spot, and I think a lot of people will toss him saying Metabos ran awful in the spiral, but that to me isn't even any indicative of Cross the Line. We very rarely see horses go from the El Camino Real and are able to make that transition to the spiral. And I thought that Cross the Line, you could argue, was the better horse on the day in the El Camino Real. He had a very, very tough trip, was coming home, I thought he was traveling really well late in that spot, and he of those two was the horse that I really liked as far as if you were talking Derby prospects. I think he has a little bit more versatile of a running style, not necessarily that push-button acceleration that we see be so successful on the synthetic. So Cross the Line would need some improvement. I think we both agree on to, really be, one of the top two contenders in here. But the surface is fine, and I think his form is fine. He just really needs to set up. He needs one or two, he needs one horse to go guns blazing out there, or maybe a two-horse contested pace that, maybe you get something fall apart a little bit and he can, get up there to finish second or third. I think that's within his reach. I wouldn't completely toss him out of, the place chances, but he's going to have to show us a little bit more.
I'm intrigued because if Bolo, Prospect Park, and Dortmund run 1, 2, 3, it's likely that all three would go to the Kentucky Derby. And what's interesting is the Kentucky Derby would be a completely different pace scenario, completely different amount of, like, and all of a sudden you're adding in 20 horses, faster pace. Like, people will look at the result, like if Dortmund beats Prospect Park by 5 lengths and just say, oh, Dortmund's better than Prospect Park. That's how you get some value, because I don't always believe that. Like in a 6-horse field, I believe Dortmund's better than Prospect Park. But give me 20 horses and a new track and a fast pace, and I'm not necessarily going to buy into that theory. Same thing with Bolo. I mean, I agree with you. He's always been rank, but God, he's a nice horse. And maybe a 20-horse field and coming from 12th, which I always say, just look at the past performances of Fusiliachi Pegasus. Had never been worse than second in any race in his life and came from 17th in the Derby. Like, horses that win, good horses can do that. Now, you're guessing, but I'm just saying it's been done in the past. And even Unbridled, like, he came from 17th, 18th place, and he'd never been that far back. So when you get 20 horses, yes, horses are going to come from 19th place because there's 20 horses in the race. Like, there's never 20 horses in these prep races.
Yeah, and if we're talking Derby and these horses from California, the form gets really weird for me because, you know, at one hand I look at it and I'm like, wow, this is impressive. Same horses are winning every time, which to me is always indicative that you have at least one good horse. I think when you get an area where all these horses are swapping victories is when I get a little more suspect about the crew around there. So I think we have good horses. We've seen, you know, them travel Firing Line, won at Sunland. We saw St. John Bay had, you know, was well accounted for himself over in Louisiana. So, you know, we've seen some good signs, but in the same breath, I think this, of any area, of these Derby preps, has had the smallest fields. Every single race, they've been small because Dortmund has always, in Firing Line for some time as well, they loomed large in this area. People didn't want to go in these races. They're flying out to Keeneland to get away from these horses. So, whereas I think, you know, Florida, here now in Kentucky, we're seeing large fields and horses who, you know, will win those races. You know, they're more accustomed to running in a large field, like they're, you know, not as big as they'll get in the Derby, but still a field of some depth. And it seems like Dortmund, though, he wins with style, and I like visually what he's done, and he runs fast. You have to question a little bit when he's just beating small field after small field after small field.
Yes, you know, that's where you know, if you're going to get upsets in the Derby, it's not because, you know, like I say, so many horses win the Derby. It's not the best horse that wins every year. The thing that makes the Derby is the 20-horse field and the pace. Because in all the preps, a lot of times you don't have pace, and you definitely don't have usually more than 10 horses. And this year we're stretching to get to 7 or 8 in all these preps. So because I'm not including Decabrist as an official full horse. I'm including him as a half a horse in all of the preps. So for historical record keeping, if you look at my numbers next year, you're going to see this half, and if you wonder what that is, that's Decabrist. So,
well, as far as Dortmund goes, too, I mean, that's why when I think of him, to me, his most impressive race to me is still at Churchill. Because it was a larger field, he was outside, he was a little bit off the pace. Like, when I saw that race, I thought, Derby horse. Now, he hasn't quite given me that same look again, and we'll see what he does here.
Yeah, and he can't give you that look in 5-horse fields, though. That's the point. So I wouldn't mind a loss by Dortmund here. It would double his odds and give a lot of people a lot of doubt. And you know, I just think, and same thing, you know, if Prospect Park were to win or Bolo were to win, you know, that to me doesn't mean they're going to win the Derby either. So I just think it could validate that these three. I do think these 3 horses are pretty good. Now. I mean, I don't know what that really means, but I just think these are above average horses. Bolo ultimately is probably going to be on the turf, but we don't really know. I mean, you know, horses normally they run one good one, so that worries me a little bit about Bolo. But a small field, I guess that helps him. And he gets Mike Smith, and he had a nice workout again the other day, and so I guess we'll see. You know, it worries me that maybe he could run another good race here, and then he flattens out at Churchill in his 3rd dirt race. So that's the only thing I'm a little bit worried about Bolo, is that he could run that 2nd good race in a row, and then, you know, that 3rd dirt one could be the one where he bounces back. So we'll see it. I mean, we'll definitely determine the Oaks field this week, and then, you know, not to say that the favorites are going to win or lose, but I think how they win and look in these final preps is going to determine how the tote board will look on Derby Day. So next week we come back, and we've got some more great racing for you. We've got the Arkansas Derby, and we'll see what else is up on the calendar, but that'll be our main prep for the Derby. And then we've still got the Lexington in a couple of weeks. And that's going to do it for another edition of Down to the